Okay, the final step on our owls. We have all these little textures in here. Everything is finished. So now we want to give it a little antique-y look. And we're going to use shoe polish, okay? Shoe polish is what your dad probably puts on his nice dress shoes to keep them shiny and clean and take the scuffs away. So we're going to use that on here. It is messy and it doesn't come out of your hands that easily. So here's what you're going to do. It's got a sponge on there. In the middle is a hard plastic. You don't want to scratch your foil with that hard plastic, but you do want to use the spongy part. And you can kind of bop it up and down, like on the newspaper, to get it primed and get it started and start coming out. You can see how it's starting to ooze out. And then you're going to put it onto your owl, and you're just going to work it, sponge it down, and work it all into those little cracks and crevices that you just made. So what I'm doing is squish, 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 so I get a whole bunch out there. And then I'm going to use the sponge to kind of move it around and get it down into all those textures. You can see how it's already picking up some of those textures in there. Squish, 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 move it around into the whole entire thing. That's what the newspaper is there for. So go all the way off the newspaper. And what we're going to do is put that black texture down into the cracks and crevices. And we're going to wipe it back off the highlights, the parts that are sticking up in the air. So I'm giving it a good squishy squishy. And I'm getting it all over this piece of cardboard so that that shoe polish is really down into all those textures and patterns that you put on there. Again, give it a squish, 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 but don't drag it because that hard plastic will drag across your foil and tear it. So you're just going to kind of squish and move the liquid around. Now, here's where you have to use your brain. You can't forget about this. We're going to leave it alone for 20 minutes. So look at your clock, look at your watch, count out 20 minutes and just leave it like that. And then I'll show you the final step. Get it started here. And about 20. There we go. Okay, so this has sat for 20 minutes or so. And now I'm going to just take something soft. It could be tissues or even your cotton balls. That would work fine too. And you're just going to kind of buff it off the surface. So I'm pushing very gentle this time so that I just take it off the top of these ridges and leave it down in the cracks. And that's going to help kind of give it that antique look, and it's really going to help your whole design show up. So I'm going to try to get rid of these puddles that I made, and I'm going to kind of buff it off just the surface. I'm going over it very lightly, and so it'll stay, that shoe polish will stay down inside those cracks, but give me a nice clean edge on top. You probably won't have too much texture in your background because, of course, we didn't really put any texture in the background, but that's okay. That's going to make the owl stand out even more. So I'm just going to lightly give it a quick little buff, buff, buff. It's still wet and it still needs to dry, but for the most part, we're going to leave that down there. If you wipe too hard and it comes off of some places, you can always repeat the process. You can put this on for 20 minutes, let it kind of dry a little bit, and then sort of just buff it back off the top. Okay? So you can work on that. Like I think I might have gotten too much off of his forehead, so I'll work on his little forehead some more, and he'll be just fine. And then I'll let him dry overnight. Done! So for our next project, we're going to do a watercolor painting of a good Halloween spooky eyeball. And we're going to take it step by step with the pupil and the iris and then the white part and lots of bloodshot veins and all that good stuff in there. So let's take a look. We can get started on this while our owl is drying for 20 minutes and then we can go back to it. Here's what our final project will look like. Kind of looks like me in the morning when I first wake up. Okay, for your eyeball, you're going to get 1, 2, 3 circles and large, medium, small. We're going to work on the medium small first, so you can just set that aside. And we're going to work on this one. Okay, first thing you're going to want to do is make your pupil nice and black everywhere. So go around carefully around the edges, and you're just going to color the whole inside black with a good Sharpie marker. We want to use Sharpie instead of Crayola marker so that it does not bleed when we put down some watercolor. So just go around and get at your pupil nice and dark. There you go, all colored in. The pupil's nice and dark. Now the next step is to draw and cut some reflections. So I like to keep those little sparks of reflection kind of curved because you know your eye is round and so you want it curved. So I could draw something that is along this line and cut it out, or I could even draw something that is sort of a triangle shape, but it's still on that curve. And then sometimes there's still that little flake that's in there. It could be a square or it could be a circle. You decide. And then sometimes this curved piece can even be broken up into 2 pieces. And you can cut those out and then glue them on. So I'm going to cut those out and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here is a little reflection that I cut out with the little dot in there. And you can see how it's curved to meet the shape of that circle, and it's also off to the side. I'm not going to glue it in the center. That's not going to make sense. I'm going to put it off to the side a little bit. You can still see my pencil lines on there. So what I'm going to do is put the glue on the side with the pencil lines and glue it upside down, and that way you won't see those pencil lines. So here's one idea, and that's sort of the triangle shape. Here's another idea, and please note that I'm putting on an itty bitty tiny bit of glue. I might even just smear it around a little bit and flip it over and kind of glue it around that curve, and then I can glue that dot in there. So these are 2 different kind of shapes, sort of a rectangular curve shape and a triangular curve shape. And then here's the third idea, that kind of broken rectangular curve with the little highlight in there. So all I did was use the extra paper on the outside of my eyeball just to draw these, cut them out, and glue them into the center of the eye. So we're going to get out our watercolors. I'm going to soften these up a little bit because I really want to get some good intense color in there all along. Then the first thing I'm going to do is wet all around here. We're going to do what's called the iris, the colored part of your eye. And we're going to use that wet and wet technique. So you're going to get it all wet. Don't get your highlight painted. We want to keep that nice and white on that black background. But all around this outside circle or the iris. So I'm going to wet it down first. Let that paper start soaking it up. And then it really doesn't matter what colors you lay into your iris. Some colors, eyes are green, some eyes are blue, some eyes are green and blue. A lot of eyes have a yellow sort of ring on the inside. It doesn't really matter what color you do it, but you want it to be all colored and no white. You don't want any white part of the eye in this iris. So you're going to have to give it some kind of color all the way around. I like to put a little bit of yellow or yellow orange right on the inside, and it will bleed through that watercolor because that looks kind of creepy, and it is Halloween and I'm doing a big fat eyeball, so I'm going to keep it a little bit colored like that. And then I could maybe run a little bit of blue around the outside, and I'm trying to get some pretty intense paint on there so that I don't leave it too white. And you can see how that's going to bleed all the way through that wet and wet. And then I can even go back and dab a little bit of green in the middle so that the blue and the yellow and the green sort of work their way together through that wet paper. Now the yellow is pretty intense, so I think what I'm going to do, just to tone it down a little bit, there we go, is maybe get some brown and put that on the very inside part. So the brown will merge with the yellow. This is going to be like an old witch's bloodshot eye. So here's another eye that I'm working on, and I've wet it first so that I get that wet and wet, and I'm going to bleed some of this brown around the edges. So I'm going to kind of mix them up. You can go outside the edges a little bit because we're going to cut these out. And I'm just going to let that sit and bleed. Give yourself some color on the eyes. Really, any kind of color will do because it could be any kind of eyeball. This could even be a dragon's eyeball. It doesn't really have to be a person's eyeball. So, you know, kind of figure out just what you think will look good and then let it dry just like that. Okay, so we're going to finish two things today. First, you're going to finish up your owl and let that dry. Then you're going to finish up the inside of your eyeball and let that dry. This watercolor is laid nice and flat and dried for me. And then next week, we'll finish this part up and then work on the white part of the eye. All right, see you then. Bye-bye.